There is a story her mother used to tell about a girl who owed the night a debt she could never repay. The girl had borrowed warmth from the dark, a single hour of it, pressed against her chest like a coal, and the night had let her keep it. For a while, the way the night always lets you keep things until it decides to collect. Her mother told the story without a moral. That was the part Marin never forgot. No lesson, no warning. Just the girl and the debt and the dark waiting at the window. Her mother died before Marin turned 12. Before the pack declared her wolfless. Before the word barren was written in the registry beside her name like a sentence already handed down. She had no wolf, no rank, no future the pack could use. What she had was memory. Not the soft, decorative kind. Not the memory of sunsets or the faces of people she had loved. The hard kind, the kind that cataloged everything, the exact weight of a silence before a man decided to strike. The particular stillness in a room when a decision had already been made. The precise way a story changed, depending on who was telling it and what they needed you to believe. She remembered everything. Every version of everything, and she had learned over the years that this was a more dangerous gift than claws. The night before her father sold her, she sat at the window of their small house at the edge of pack territory and said the words of her mother's story aloud, quietly, to no one. The girl owed the night a debt. She did not know then what it meant for her. She would. The carriage that came for her was not marked. Marin had expected something, a sigil, a banner, some declaration of where she was being sent. There was nothing, just black wood and black horses and a driver who did not speak when her father handed him the document, already signed, already sealed. Her father did not look at her when she climbed in. She looked at him. She always looked. She needed to understand the thing that was happening, and understanding required observation. And observation required that you not look away from what was painful. He had the expression of a man who had made a calculation and found it acceptable. That was all. She filed it away. The carriage moved north. She knew it was north because the light changed. The flat, dry gold of pack lowland giving way to something colder and more particular. Pine smell through the cracked window, stone under the wheels instead of road. She had been told nothing except a name, Caliph. She had heard it the way you hear the name of a place where people go and do not return from. In the register of warning rather than information. She had pressed her father for details, and he had said, "He will not hurt you if you are useful." And she had understood from that sentence exactly 3 things. That the Alpha King was someone her father feared enough to be honest about. That usefulness was her only currency, and that her father did not know, or did not care, whether she survived. The carriage climbed for most of a day. When it stopped, she looked out the window and saw stone. Walls of it, dark and enormous, rising in a way that suggested they had been built not to impress but to endure. There were no banners here either, no decoration, just mass and height, and the absolute certainty that whatever was inside had no need to announce itself. A woman met her at the gate. She was perhaps 50, dressed in gray, with the particular bearing of someone who had spent decades being efficient in service to a power they had decided not to question. She did not introduce herself. "You'll follow me?" the woman said. "You won't speak unless spoken to. You won't wander. You won't ask questions of the guard." "What am I here for?" Marin asked. The woman looked at her, a brief assessment, neither hostile nor welcoming. "That's for the king to say." She followed, through a courtyard that held cold air even out of the wind, through a corridor that smelled of stone and old wood, and something underneath both that she could not name. something that was not quite animal and not quite smoke. Up a staircase, through a door. The room she was put in was not a cell. That was the first surprise. It was small but clean, a bed with actual linen, a window, a lamp, a basin with water. She sat on the edge of the bed and did not sleep. She thought about the story her mother used to tell, about the girl who borrowed warmth from the dark. The night always lets you keep things, her mother had said, until it decides to collect. She did not see the king the first day, or the second. What she saw was the castle, its rhythms, its staff, its silences. She was given no instructions beyond where she could and could not go. She was fed, she was left alone, she observed. By the third day, she had mapped the servant hierarchy with reasonable accuracy. The woman who had met her at the gate, she learned her name was Dresda, occupied the highest domestic rank and operated with the quiet authority of someone who had survived multiple changes of power by being indispensable. There was a guard named Ferric who watched the eastern corridor. He had the eyes of a man who enjoyed his authority and the body of a man who had never had reason to doubt it. It was Ferric who first spoke to her beyond the obligatory. "Wolfless," he said, the morning of her fourth day, when she was crossing the courtyard. Not to her specifically. He said it to the other guard beside him in the tone of a remark, but loudly enough that she would hear. Wonder what use he has for something like that. She stopped, turned. "I wonder the same thing, she said. "Though I notice you've been watching me cross this courtyard every morning, so perhaps you're more curious than you're letting on." Ferric's expression shifted from amusement to something harder. "Careful," he said. "I am careful," she said. Constantly, she walked on. She felt his stare against the back of her neck, but she did not turn again. She filed Ferric away, a man who performed cruelty from the safety of proximity to power. He would be consistent in this, useful to know. That evening, Dresda came to her room and told her to dress and come downstairs. The dining hall she was led to was not the great hall she had passed. It was smaller, a working room with a long table and a fire and maps on the walls. She had time to observe the maps before she heard the door open behind her. She did not turn immediately. She let herself take one more breath, then she turned. The Alpha King of the Northern Territory was taller than the stories suggested, which she had not thought possible. He was not dressed for ceremony, dark clothing, no sigil, no crown. He moved into the room with the particular economy of someone who had never needed to perform authority because they had never been without it. His face was harder than she had expected. There was a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. Old, fully healed, the kind of scar that had been there long enough to become part of the architecture of a face. His eyes were dark. They moved to her immediately and stayed. She held the look. She had learned young that looking away was a form of surrender, and she had very little left that she was willing to surrender. "Maren," he said. Her name in his mouth was flat and informational, not a greeting. "Yes," she said. "Sit." She sat. He sat across from her at the end of the table, and a servant she hadn't seen moved in the shadows to pour something. He didn't eat, neither did she. "You were registered wolfless at 13, he said. "Yes, and barren. That's what the register says." He watched her. "You don't argue it." "Arguing a record doesn't change it, and I don't know whether the record is accurate. I know it exists. I know that it's why I'm here, instead of someone with more conventional value." Something shifted in his expression, too small to name, but present. "Your father owes my territory a debt," he said. "He settled it with you because you were the only asset he had that wouldn't damage his standing if he lost you." It was not intended to wound. It was stated as a fact, which was almost worse. She held it. "That's an accurate description," she said. "I don't need a mate," he said. "I need something else." "What?" He was quiet for a moment. "I have a problem that requires a particular kind of mind. Your father's record on you, before the wolfless notation, lists a memory that borders on preternatural and an analytical tendency his beta described as unsettling in a girl so young. She had not known that was in her record. Your beta read my father's pack records? I read everything about what enters my territory. He stood. "You'll eat. Tomorrow I'll tell you what I need. If you can do it, you stay under my protection for as long as the work takes. If you can't," he stopped, "you'll be returned." She understood what returned meant. She understood it precisely. "I'll be here," she said. He left. She sat alone at the table with the untouched food and the fire and the maps, and thought about the girl who owed the night a debt. The night always lets you keep things until it decides to collect. He told her the next evening, not in the dining room this time, in a room she hadn't been shown on the upper floor, with bookshelves on every wall and a desk that held the organized weight of someone who used it daily. He stood at the window when she arrived. He didn't turn. "There have been 11 deaths in my territory in 7 months," he said. "Not battle deaths, not executions. 11 wolves who died with no wound, no sign of struggle, no poison the healers could name, found in their beds, or in the field, or sitting in a chair, just dead." She said nothing. She listened. They were not random. He turned. They were all witnesses. She sat down without being invited. He watched her do it, but said nothing. "Witnesses to what?" she asked. "That is what I don't know." He moved to the desk. On it, a row of files, each labeled with a name. Each of them saw something. Each of them was scheduled to speak to me directly. None of them made it to the meeting. Who knew about the meetings? My counsel, my beta, my household staff. So someone close enough to know your schedule. Yes. And you don't trust anyone in that circle enough to investigate from within it. His expression didn't change. "If I did, you wouldn't be here." She looked at the files. "What do you want from me?" "Read everything. Find the pattern. Tell me what connects them beyond the obvious." He paused. "I've had 3 of my best trackers on this for 4 months. They find nothing." "Because trackers look for physical evidence," she said. "They look for what happened. You need someone to look for what the events mean." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I'll need access to these files, and to the castle records, staff schedules, supply deliveries, correspondence logs. I'll need to be able to move through the castle without the guard assuming I'm somewhere I shouldn't be. That can be arranged. I'll also need you not to tell anyone what I'm doing, not your beta, not Dresda." He looked at her steadily. "You're asking me to keep a secret from my own household." "I'm asking you to let me be invisible. If someone in your household is responsible and they know you've brought in an analyst, the behavior will change. I need to see the pattern without disturbing it." He studied her for a long time, long enough that she became aware of it, of being studied, of being assessed at a depth that most people didn't bother with. "All right," he said. She took the first file home to her room that night. She read until the lamp burned low. When she set the last page down, she sat very still in the dark and began to build the shape of what she was seeing. 11 people, 7 months. Each one scheduled to speak privately with the king. What she noticed, what the trackers would have missed, was that none of them had been afraid in the days before they died. The reports described them as calm, normal, sleeping well, which meant they had not known they were in danger, which meant the threat had come from something they trusted. She lay down on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and understood that she was in a more dangerous position than she had been in her father's house, and that it was the most interesting she had ever felt in her life. A rhythm established itself without either of them naming it. Each evening, after the castle's day work was done, she came to the upper room. He was always there before her. He never appeared to wait. He was always doing something, reading or writing or standing at the window. But he was always there. They did not speak of anything personal. They spoke of the files. She reported what she found. He listened. He offered context when she needed it. She pushed back when his context didn't fit the pattern. He accepted her corrections without the particular stiffening she had expected from a man of his rank. On the fifth evening, she said, "The scar, the one on your face, is it from a challenge?" He looked at her. "I'm not asking to be personal," she said. "I'm asking because I'm building a picture of your history and the shape of your enemies, and I want to know whether the scar is part of that picture." "It's from a challenge," he said. 12 years ago. The challenger is dead." "Did he have allies?" Pause. "He may have had sympathizers in the Western territories." She wrote it down. He watched her write it and said nothing for a moment. Then, "You never ask things without a reason." "Almost never," she said. "What's the exception?" She looked up. "When I want to know something for myself. I haven't done that here." "Why not?" "Because I'm not certain yet whether you're someone it's safe to be curious about." He was quiet. "And how will you determine that?" "I'm already determining it," she said. "Every evening." He didn't respond to that. He turned back to the document he had been reading. She turned back to her files, but there was something different in the room after that, a quality of attention on both sides that had not been there before. She catalogued it, set it aside, came back to it later, alone in her room, and sat with the shape of it for a while before she put it away. She found the pattern in the third week. It was in the supply records, specifically in the deliveries logged against the kitchen schedule. Every death had occurred within 48 hours of a particular supply delivery from a particular merchant in the lowland territory. Not the same items, not the same staff signing for receipt, but the same merchant code, buried under different subcontractors, visible only if you cross-reference the supply log. She brought it to him on a Tuesday evening, laid the papers out on his desk in order, and walked him through it without preamble. He stood beside her at the desk, closer than usual because the papers required it, and followed her hand across the documents as she pointed. She could feel the particular quality of his attention. It was total. It did not wander. "The merchant," he said when she finished. "A front," she said. "The name is registered, but the physical address changes with each delivery cycle. Whoever is using it knows your supply chains well enough to hide inside them. That means someone gave them the chains." "Yes." He was quiet for a long time, looking at the papers. "This took my trackers 4 months and they found nothing. You found it in 3 weeks. Your trackers were looking for physical connection, presence. I was looking for pattern and absence." She paused. "Absence is harder to see but easier to find once you know what shape it has." He looked at her then, not the assessing look from earlier weeks, something different, something that was trying to figure out what to do with what it was seeing. "This is useful," he said. The word fell short of what his expression carried, and she noted the gap between them. "I know," she said. because she was not going to pretend she didn't. Ferrick found her in the archive room 2 days later. She was cross-referencing the merchant records against the staff roster. Not because she suspected any particular person yet, but because she was building the map, when she heard the door open and his specific weight on the floorboards. She did not look up. "You're in a restricted section," he said. "I have access," she said. "Who gave it?" "The king." She continued writing. "You're welcome to confirm it with him." He came further into the room. She was aware of him moving into the space behind her, and she adjusted her awareness accordingly, marking the distance, marking the door, marking the weight of the records. "You've been up in his private rooms every night," Ferrick said. She wrote another line. "Yes. Wolfless, barren, up in the king's rooms every night. He let the silence do what he intended it to do. People are talking." She set down her pen, turned to face him. She had learned that looking at a person directly was sometimes the most effective way to make them understand that you were not afraid of them. "What people say about me doesn't change what I'm doing," she said. "And what I'm doing is useful to the king, which makes it useful to his territory, which makes your opinion of it, and anyone else's, functionally irrelevant." His jaw tightened. "You think you're safe here." "I think I have work to do," she said. "And I think you know better than to touch someone under the king's protection, which means this conversation is finished." He left. She turned back to her papers and noticed her hands were steady. She took note of that. Then she returned to work. That evening she mentioned it to the king, without emphasis, because he needed to know, and it was information, and she treated information as information. "Ferrick spoke to you in the archive," he said. "He implied that people were drawing conclusions about my presence in your private rooms." And? And I told him his opinion was irrelevant. "It won't." The 11th file had something the others didn't. She found it on a night when the castle had gone quiet around her and she was working later than usual, the lamp close to guttered. It was a marginal note, not in the official report, but on the back of a personal letter found among the victim's effects. It said, "I have seen what he carries. I understand now why they fear him. I will tell the king, and then perhaps the fear will end." She read it 3 times. What he carries. She brought it to the king the following evening without the other papers, just the single page. He read it once, set it down. "You know what this means," she said. "There's a story," he said after a long pause. He was standing at the window. The particular quality of his stillness was different from its usual, not the stillness of control, but of restraint. "About what I am. I carry something, a curse, the old packs call it. My bloodline was marked 3 generations back. The story is that the alpha who carries the mark will consume his own pack if he bonds, that the wolf inside him will turn on those he claims. It is why I have no mate. It is why I have never—" He stopped. "And the witnesses," she said, "were people who had seen evidence of this mark." "Yes." His voice was controlled, but what was under it was not. "And someone has been killing them before they could bring it to me. Someone who wants the story to stay contained, who wants me to remain without bond, without—" He stopped again. "Why?" she asked. "What do they gain from your isolation?" He turned from the window. "An alpha without bond, without heir, his territory reverts to council governance upon his death. 3 of my council members hold territorial rights in trust. If I die without heir or bonded mate, they inherit governance." She had the full shape of it now. "It's not a curse story," she said. "It's an inheritance strategy. Someone is sustaining the fear of your bloodline, killing witnesses who might debunk it, to keep you isolated, to keep the inheritance pathway clear. He was very still. The witnesses weren't going to expose a curse, she said. They were going to expose the lie. He sat down. She had never seen him sit like that, the way of a man who needed a moment to absorb something. She said nothing. She let him have it. After a long while, he said, "How certain are you? The supply chain connections are fact. The inheritance law is fact. The motive follows from both. The interpretation is mine, but the pattern holds." He looked at her. "I have lived with this story for my entire adult life," he said. "It has shaped every choice I have made." "I know," she said quietly. "And you're telling me it may not be real. I'm telling you someone needed it to be real. That's not the same as saying it is." She paused. "Fear stories often have a root, but the root and the weapon are two different things. And what's been used against you is the weapon." He said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the particular flatness of someone controlling something large. "Why are you telling me this carefully? You could have said it plainly." "I am saying it plainly," she said. "I'm saying it carefully because you've been living inside this story, and that's not nothing. And I have enough experience with the difference between a fact and what a fact costs someone to know that they're not always the same thing." Something shifted in his face, small, decisive. "How did you come to understand that?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I was declared wolfless at 13, barren at 15. Both of those are entries in a register. I have spent a long time learning the difference between what a register says and what is true." He looked at her for a long time. "And what is true, in your case?" "I don't know," she said. "I know what I have. I don't know what I don't have, and I've stopped treating the absence of proof as proof of absence." The fire had burned low. The lamp was nearly out. "You should rest," he said. His voice was different, not softer, exactly, but less defended. "So should you," she said, and stood and left and walked down the corridor to her room with the understanding that something had irrevocably shifted and she was not afraid of it. The days that followed were quieter on the surface and charged beneath it. They still met every evening. The work continued. She was now building a case against the council members, tracing the supply chain front through 3 layers of proxy merchants to a financial account traceable to 2 names. The work was real and important, but the quality of the evenings had changed. He asked her questions that were not about the work. She answered them honestly, with the same precision she brought to everything. He listened the way he looked at maps, completely, without the partial attention she had grown used to from people who expected her to say less than she meant. He told her one evening that the scar was from his cousin's challenge, that his cousin had believed the curse story and had been afraid of him, that even as he had defeated the challenge, he had understood his cousin's fear and had spent the years since wondering if it was deserved. She said, "Fear of a thing and the thing itself are different. The most dangerous people I have known were not afraid of anyone." He looked at her. "You're afraid," she said, "of what you carry, of what you might do. That fear isn't weakness. It's evidence that you think carefully about harm. The man who is actually dangerous doesn't worry about being dangerous." He was quiet for a long time. "You say things that rearrange how I understand events," he said. "I say what I observe," she said. "Most people have the observations, they just don't say them." "Why do you?" "Because silence that protects a fiction isn't kind," she said. "It's just easier." He turned to look at her fully. "Marin." It was the first time he had said her name since their first meeting. and the way it landed now was entirely different from that flat, informational first use. She noticed this with her full attention. "Yes," she said. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not for the work. The work will end. I want you to remain in this territory, under my protection, as—" He stopped. "I am asking this poorly." "You're asking clearly," she said. "You want me to stay, and you don't have a clean category for what you're asking me to be." "Yes." She thought about it honestly. "I need to tell you something first," she said. "Not because it changes what I'll decide, but because you should have the full picture." He waited. "When I was 15 and the register was updated," she said, "there was a male in the pack. He was my mate. The wolf bond indicated it. I felt it, even without a wolf of my own." He rejected the claim. He said the bond was invalid because of what was in my register. She said it evenly, without the performance of old pain. "I'm telling you because you should know that the entry in my register carries that history. A rejection at the age of 15 by someone who decided I wasn't worth the uncertainty." He was very still. "I'm not asking for your anger on my behalf," she said. "I'm asking for the full picture to be mutual." He stood up from the desk. He moved to the window, not away from her, but toward something he needed to look at. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned back and said, "The curse story kept me from bonding. His cowardice kept you from it. We have both been shaped by other people's fear." He paused. "I would like very much to be shaped by something else." She looked at him. "So would I," she said. She was given 3 days before Dresda came to her room in the early morning. The expression on Dresda's face told her before any words did. Dresda had the particular stillness of someone delivering bad news that they themselves found difficult. "There are men here from the lowland territories," she said, "with a document from your father. He sold the debt to a southern lord. The claim on you has been transferred." Maren set down the cup she was holding. "Under what legal ground?" "The original agreement, your father's bond debt to the king, was a personal contract. Your father had a creditor lien clause. He has discharged it to Lord Essien." Dresda's mouth tightened. "Lord Essien intends to take you south by the end of the week, as a registered bonded servant. The document is in order." She understood the trap completely. A personal contract, transferred through a legal clause her father had likely not even understood he was signing. A pathway from her father's desperation to a lord she had never met, passing through a loophole the people who wanted her out of Calith's castle had found and used. She also understood why they wanted her gone. She had found their supply chain. She was close to their names. "Where is the king?" she said. "In council. He doesn't know yet." "Then I need to speak to him before the council session ends." She stood up. "Can you arrange that?" Dresda looked at her for a moment, a look that contained the history of their months in the same castle, and something that was not quite warmth but was adjacent to it. "I can arrange it," Dresda said. The council room was not a place she had been before. She entered it in the middle of session, which she knew was a breach, which she did it anyway, because the thing she needed to prevent was time. The 3 council members were at the table. The king was at its head. He looked at her when she entered. His expression shifted. Not alarm, but the particular sharpening of someone who reads environments quickly. "My lord," she said, standing at the door, "I need to speak with you, before any legal documents currently in this castle are processed." One of the council members, she had a name for him now, Councillor Vesh, said smoothly, "This woman interrupts council session." "She speaks at my discretion," the king said, in a tone that ended the sentence. She kept her eyes on him. A transfer document has arrived this morning regarding my status. I believe it is connected to the case I have been building. I believe the individuals who arranged for it to arrive now did so because I am within 48 hours of completing that case and naming names. I need you to have seen the completed work before any document is processed, because once I'm gone, the pattern I've assembled leaves with me. The king stood up, not suddenly, not with force, just stood. This session is recessed, he said. The 3 council members did not move immediately. He looked at them, and the quality of that look was such that they moved. When they were gone, she set the final compiled document on the table. 14 pages, 3 months of work in order. The names are on page 12, she said. He sat down and read. She stood and watched the fire. After a long time, he turned to page 12. He was quiet for a very long time. Vesh, he said. His brother-in-law holds the financial account. Vesh provided the schedule information. The second name is Counselor Brast. He controlled the supply authorization. She paused. The transfer document arrived because they know I have this, which means they're afraid of it. He looked up. And you walked into council session to make sure I had it before they acted, he said. Yes. That was a considerable risk. Yes. He stood again, and this time he crossed the room, and she stood her ground because she had learned by now that standing her ground was simply what she did. He stood close, close enough that she could see the scar with complete clarity and understand it as what it was, the mark of a man who had been tried and had not broken. The transfer document, he said, is not going to be processed. Under what mechanism, she asked. Under the mechanism that your debt was discharged to my territory, not to a personal creditor of your father's. The original contract was a territorial bond debt. It follows the rules of territorial law, not personal lien law. He paused. Essien's document is invalid. My legal counsel will confirm it within the hour. She held very still. Did you know that when my father signed? Yes. And you wrote the contract that way deliberately. A pause. Yes. She looked at him. When? She asked. The day your father came to me with the debt, he said. Before I had met you. I knew what kind of man he was. I wrote the contract to close the loophole he would inevitably try to use. He held her gaze. I did not know then that the person I was protecting would become. He stopped. Indispensable? She said quietly. That is not the word I was reaching for, he said. She understood what word he had been reaching for. Caliph, she said, his name, the first time she had used it. And it changed something in the room immediately. Yes, he said. I'll stay, she said, not because the contract says I must, because I choose to. He was quiet for a long moment. I know the difference, he said. The arrest of councillors Vesh and Brast took 3 days to complete, not because the evidence was insufficient, but because the territory law required a formal hearing before 2 impartial alpha witnesses, and summoning them from neighboring territories took time. During those 3 days she stayed in the castle and worked, and in the evening she sat in the upper room, and sometimes they spoke, and sometimes they did not. I found that the silence between them had changed character entirely. It was no longer the guarded quiet. It was the particular silence of 2 people who had decided to stay in the same room. On the second night, she brought her mother's story without intending to. They had been talking about something else. Then they had been quiet, and she heard herself say, my mother used to tell a story about a girl who owed the knight a debt. He turned toward her. She told him the whole of it, the girl who borrowed warmth, the dark that let you keep things until it collected, the absence of a moral. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You said she told it without a lesson, he said. Yes. Why do you think she told it at all? Marin thought about it. I think she told it because she wanted me to know that some debts aren't punishments, she said slowly. That the night collects not because it's cruel, but because it gave something real. That there's a difference between a debt that diminishes you and a debt that changes what you are. I think she was trying to tell me that being changed by something is not the same as being ruined by it. He said, "She sounds like someone who understood more than she was given room to say." She did, Marin said. She died before I was old enough to ask her the right questions. What would you have asked her? Whether she thought it was the borrowing that mattered or the keeping, she said. Whether the debt is the price of having held it at all. He was quiet for a long time. What do you think? He said. I think I've been afraid to hold warm things, she said, because I was told I was the kind of person they would be taken from. She looked at him. I'm revising that position. He reached across the distance between them and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it. Her hand in his, there in the firelight, and the simplicity of it was more than she had expected something to be. Good, he said. She did not look away. Chapter 12. The formal hearing was on a Thursday. She was not required to attend. She attended. She sat at the back of the hall and watched Councillor Vesh discover that the evidence arrayed against him had been assembled by a wolfless, barren woman from a low-rank pack who had been in his territory for less than 4 months. She watched his expression move through disbelief and then through the particular rearrangement of a man who had underestimated something and was now paying the specific price of that underestimation. He looked at her once directly. She held the look. She did not perform triumph. She simply let him see that she was there and that she had done what she had done, and that he did not require his acknowledgement of it to make it true. The ruling was swift. Both names were stripped of council standing and territorial claim. The inheritance pathway to the king's land was declared closed by formal judgment and recorded in the territorial law. Afterward in the corridor, Ferric was standing near the hall door. She stopped. He had watched the hearing. She had noticed him at the edge of the room, and she had noticed, because she noticed everything, that something in his bearing had changed over the course of it. Not dramatic, just a degree of certainty gone. She was useful, he said. It was not an apology. She had not expected an apology and would not have known what to do with one. What it was, she understood, was a man who had organized his behavior around proximity to power and who had just watched her demonstrate that power could reorganize itself around different things than he had assumed. I know, she said, and walked past him. Chapter 13. The question of what she was, to him in the eyes of the territory, in the record, was raised formally by his legal counsel at the end of the week. The Alpha King had no mate, no heir. The council positions were now vacant and needed to be filled. The territory was watching. He brought it to her in the upper room on a Friday evening, laid the legal counsel's document on the table, and sat back in his chair and looked at her. There are 3 options, he said, as listed here. Protected dependent, which is what you are now. Bonded servant, which is what Essien tried to claim. Or, he paused, bonded mate. She read the document. She read it carefully, which was the only way she read things. A bonded mate claim under territorial law, she said, in the absence of a wolf bond, requires mutual declaration and witness. It's not automatically recognized in all neighboring territories. No, he said, but it's binding in mine. And you're asking me. I'm asking you, he said. She set the document down. She thought about the story, the girl, the dark, the debt. She thought about what her mother had been trying to tell her. She thought about what it meant to hold a warm thing, knowing it could be collected, and whether the collection was the point or whether the holding was. She thought about a man who had written a contract to protect a stranger because he recognized the shape of a trap, who had read 11 murder files and felt the weight of 11 people who had died trying to reach him, who held a curse story like a stone he carried because no one had ever shown him it was made of paper. Yes, she said. He was very still for a moment. You're certain. I say things when I'm certain, she said. You've had months to observe this. Something moved across his face that she had not seen before, something unguarded and complete and entirely his. Yes, he said. I have. Epilogue, 1 year later. Spring came late to the Northern Territory, but it came fully when it arrived, the cold stone of the castle walls catching early morning light in a way that turned them from dark to amber, and the courtyard below her window full of the ordinary, unremarkable sounds of a place at work. Marin stood at the window of the upper room, her room now, their room, still full of maps and files, and the organized weight of decisions, and watched the courtyard and thought about nothing in particular, which was a thing she had learned to do over the course of the year. She had always thought in motion. She was learning to be still. The register had been amended, not because she had asked for it. She hadn't, and she didn't require it, but because the king's physician had reviewed the original notation and found it to be based on a single assessment conducted under duress when she was 15, by a healer who had since been removed from the pack rolls for falsifying records. The notation barren had been replaced with inconclusive. It was not the same as a correction. It was the same as an opening. She did not know what would come from that opening. She had stopped treating the unknown as an enemy. The wolf question remained unanswered, and she had made her peace with it. She had discovered over the course of the year that she did not need a wolf to read the room. She had something that worked better for the life she was actually living. Dresda had, without ceremony, begun treating her with the particular form of respect she reserved for people she had decided were worth something. She had, over the course of autumn, quietly begun showing Marin the administrative workings of the territory in a way that suggested she was preparing her to understand them. Marin had not commented on this. She had simply learned. Ferric had requested a transfer to the Eastern Gate posting, which was less central and carried less authority and was, she understood, what a man chose when he had decided he no longer wanted to be the kind of man he had been. She had not opposed it. The 2 council positions had been filled with men her husband had selected after a process that she had quietly helped design. A process that valued judgment and transparency over bloodline and rank. The territory had noticed. The territory had opinions. She let it. In the evenings they still sat in the upper room. They still talked about the things that mattered. The territory, the law, the work that was always ongoing. And they still sometimes fell into the particular silence that had become the texture of her daily life. She had not known at 13, at 15, at the moment she climbed into a black carriage going north, that silence could feel like this, like enough. She had told him her mother's story again, once, in the deep winter, when the fire was high and the world outside was entirely white. This time she had told it differently. Not the version she had carried since childhood, the dark collecting its debt, but the version she had slowly arrived at, the one her mother had perhaps been trying to tell all along. The girl borrowed warmth from the night. The night gave it freely. What the girl owed was not payment. What she owed was the understanding that warmth given freely is still given. That a debt of that kind is not a debt at all. That what the night had been waiting to collect all along was her willingness to believe that she deserved what she had been given. The girl kept the warmth. That was the whole story. She stood at the window in the amber morning light and held that understanding quietly, the way she had learned to hold warm things. Below her in the courtyard, a door opened. She heard his particular step, not heavy but unhurried, carrying the specific quality of a man who had stopped moving through his own territory, as though he expected it to turn on him. He came to stand beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. Neither did she. Then he said, "What are you thinking about?" "My mother's story," she said. "I think I finally understand the ending." He looked at her. "Tell me." So she did. That's the end of this story. Share it with someone who needs a good one. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next chapter.